Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Come to the program, ladies and gentlemen. It's been over a week since we had a live show. Was out of town last week. And, well, lots to talk about today. And we also have Will Thomas will be joining us later. He's an investigative reporter and journalist. The Local Law Enforcement Crimes Prevention Act was passed. And this is one act that we have Ted Pike, who was a guest on the show about 3 or 4 times talking about this particular act. It was passed yesterday through the Senate and the House. And President Bush basically said that he was going to veto. Now, we don't know if he's going to veto that act or veto the bill that was attached, that the act was attached to. The bill that was passed yesterday is the Defense Authorization Act. But the thing is, you know, normally you will have a lot of different bills attached or acts attached to a particular bill. So the Defense Authorization Act was passed yesterday, and this particular bill was part of that act, which is the Hate Crime Act. Basically what it says that it will provide assistance to state and local law enforcement agencies to combat hate crimes and amend federal law to facilitate the investigation and prosecution of violent, bias-motivated crimes. Bias-motivated crimes. I guess that could be anything. If you don't like somebody for anything, that would fall under that. If you don't like him because of his color, his the way he looks, the way he talks, if you're biased against that person for whatever reason, violently, that is, it would go under and it will be punishable by law. Now, you know, some of the people who oppose to it, like Ted Pike, thinks that we already have laws on the book to handle stuff like this, but it did pass, and President Bush said that he was going to veto this. But the most interesting thing is, like for instance, Senator Byrd of West Virginia, he was for this particular bill, but he voted against it. Now, I don't think he voted against this bill, but he voted against the Defense Authorization Act, so ended up voting for something that he wanted. That's how politics works. It's amazing. And it's amazing how they put all these kinds of different bills and vote on it on one act. So it's funny. And that's why we needed the line item veto that would allow the president to pick and choose which ones to sign and which ones not. Because with this one, the president is going to veto this, which means that it might delay some of the $42 billion that Gate was asking for, you know, our defense secretary. So we might see a delay in that. And, you know, he was there on Capitol Hill yesterday asking for $42 additional billion to run the war in Iraq. And we don't have it. We just don't have the money. And we were talking about another war that we will be engaged in, which is the war on Iran. But you know, one thing why the war in Iraq is costing us a lot of money, because we basically throwing money out in the streets. You know, we have, besides the 150 or the 165,000 troops that we have there, we also have tens of thousands of these private armies that lately was in the news. Of course, we have talked about these private armies, these mercenaries, like Blackwater, for instance. And these people, this is a private company that was contracted with the United States to provide security, and I think we have pictures of those people to provide security for our own politicians when they go to Iraq. And these people, if a normal, a regular soldier cost us $20,000, $30,000 a year or whatever, a couple of $1,000s a month, these people are costing about $15,000 to $20,000 a month. So instead of having our own people, our own regulars to provide security for our politicians and our installations there, we basically contract with these people who lately, and we have discussed here and we showed you some videos and pictures where these people in Iraq, black water contractors, they don't have the same, they don't go under the same guidelines as our troops. These people go out there in the streets, and this is what really made things bad for us in Iraq, because these people, they'll go out in the streets and just start shooting at anything and everybody, and there's no guidelines, and there's nobody, no one that can touch them. Well, last week they killed 11 Iraqis in cold blood. We showed you one time where they were riding in a car and started shooting at the cars behind them, and they were filming this. And you can hear the conversation inside that people were having fun. I don't know if they were on drugs or they were drunk, but there were few guys were having fun shooting at the cars behind them. And you can see the cars on that videotape, on that clip. You can see the cars just crashing left and right behind this car. And these people were laughing. It's like their kids having fun. You know, it's like they were on a video game, one of these, Nintendos or Xbox or something. But last week, it was the first time that the Iraqi government have decided to say something about it. And immediately the Interior Minister said that he was cutting off their license. They were ending their license. And of course, you know who runs things in Iraq. It's not the Iraqi government, it's the United States Army and the United States government. So they told the Iraqis that no, you cannot, you can't cancel the permit that this company has and the license that this company has. But so the Iraqis went back and said, well, okay, they would have to go under the same guidelines, and if they do something, we're going to be able to prosecute and all this stuff. Now, it's nonsense. They're not going to be able to prosecute anyone. But that's why our reputation in the world is bad, because we send these thugs there, these drunks, these drugged out private army, and they just have fun killing Iraqis in the streets and laugh about it. That's why our reputation is bad in the world. Another thing that our reputation is bad in the world, look what happened this week when Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, went to Columbia University and gave a speech there. Now remember, this man was invited on campus. And while he was there, the president of the university, Lee Bollinger, he basically insulted and attacked Ahmadinejad before even Ahmadinejad gave his speech. You know, I wanted to see Lee Bollinger debating Ahmadinejad instead of calling him an ignorant and uneducated and petty dictator and someone who doesn't know what he's talking about, etc., etc. We're not going to go in details what he said. I'm sure most of you have heard him. But ladies and gentlemen, you don't invite somebody to your house and insult him. The Iranian president, if we did not want him to speak, we should not have even invited him. Don't invite him to a university and then your speech, your whole speech, is defending Israel. I'm talking about Lee Bollinger. It's like he doesn't care what the American people think about inviting Ahmadinejad to speak at Columbia University, but he cares about what the Jewish lobby is going to say. Because he made it a point to say that Columbia was the center of Jewish studies in the world. It was the world center of Jewish studies. He made it a point to say that Columbia University has 800 alumni live in Israel. Why are we
Please enter your
to hell with
destination
America
number.
as long as Israel is okay. Why are we becoming our government officials? Even the last thing that I thought it would be influenced by the Jewish lobby and the Israel lobby is our academia. That is the last institution, people's institution. This university is supposed to be free speech. But Lee Bollinger did not believe in free speech. He believed in free speech. If I'll invite you and I'm going to curse you out before you even get a chance to talk. You should hear or listen to what Lee Bollinger, his opening remarks. He took 10 minutes opening remarks to basically downgrade and talk down at the president of Iran. Now, I'm not defending the president of Iran. I'm defending this country. I'm defending America and its morals. We don't invite people and end up insulting them. If you don't like somebody, just don't invite him at all. But you know what happened? With all this stuff, Ahmadinejad turned out on top, and he got a lot more than what he bargained for, because he was covered and his speech was covered. And remember, the next day he was speaking at the United Nations, and his speech was like probably the most important speech of all because of what happened the day before. But I guarantee you, if we did not do what we did at Colombia, and this fanfare about Ahmadinejad coming to speak, if we did not do what we did, and if we did not curse out the guy the day before, his UN speech would have mattered to nothing. Probably no one would have paid attention to it. But you know what? He made his point. He accomplished 100% of what he wanted to accomplish. He wanted to talk to the American people, and that he did. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Israel. Now, you do know we give Israel foreign aids. And what happens, we give them foreign aids with the money we have. And the money we have is the dollar, the American dollar, that for a long time, probably about maybe more than 60, 70 years now, the dollar was the currency of the world. Everybody wanted the dollar. But now, Israel wants its aid that we give them in euros. They want the aid, listen to this again. You know, beggars are not choosers, but when it comes to Israel, they demand that you give us money, and you give us money in euros because your dollar is no good anymore. Tzipi Livni, the Israeli foreign minister, asked Condoleezza Rice yesterday that we would like to have our aid in euros because the dollar sucks. And Condoleezza Rice said, in the spirit of Yom Kippur, the United States will not hold Israel to any agreements obligating them to accept dollars as payments for the foreign aid, for their foreign aid. We will translate our obligations into euros or whatever currency the best fits Israel's needs. Secretary Rice said. This wasn't yesterday, it was on Friday. This tells you, ladies and gentlemen, where the dollar is going. This tells you how bad our economy is doing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce my guest for tonight. He is William Thomas, well known as Will Thomas. He is an award-winning Canadian journalist specializing in health and environment. During and immediately after the Gulf War, he served 5 months in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait as a member of a 3-man environmental emergency response team. Professional journalist for nearly 4 decades, his writing and photography have appeared in more than 50 publications in 8 countries, including translations into French, Dutch, and Japanese. Winner of 4 Canadian Feature Writing Awards, he is the author of 5 books and several electronic e-books. All of his work is thoroughly documented and footnoted. Much of his current reporting is based on a trusted insider, well known to him for over 15-year working relationship. His name is Hank. Of course, that is not his real name. He is a behind-the-scene player on the world stage who draws on extensive contacts in the United States military and intelligence communities to reveal stories presented only to William Thomas. Without any further ado, Mr. Thomas, good afternoon or good evening, sir. Can you hear me? Is he on?
Right here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Very good. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Stone.
Well, let's start. Let's just give our viewers a little bit of background of what exactly you do and some of the projects that you are working on right now.
Okay, I've been an investigative journalist since the mid-1960s. I work on stories that the mainstream press ignores or is afraid to cover. I've written some books detailing Gulf War illness called Bringing the War Home. I've written 2 books on the attacks of September 11th, 2001, including my most recent book, Days of Deception, Ground Zero and Beyond. I also broke the story of chemtrails, our art belts coast to coast, back in January 1998, and I've written an updated book on that subject, Chemtrails Confirmed, 2007. I continue to do investigative journalism on my new website, willthomasonline.net, and I enjoy some very excellent sources deep inside the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill.
Now, well, let's talk about a couple of the items that you wrote about lately. Let's start with the flight of the B52 Bomber from Minot, North Dakota to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana. What was all that flight? What was it all about?
Well, of course, this is a big story on the Internet and not quite as big in the mainstream media now. But we do know that on August 30th, 2007, according to a leaked article in the Military Times, a U.S. Air Force B-52 strategic heavy bomber, supposedly mistakenly loaded with 6 nuclear cruise missiles, took off from Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota and flew for more than 3 hours over at least 5 states before landing at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. That's the official story. Now, I have, as I mentioned, an inside source with military background who tells me what really happened is not quite the same as what was reported. First of all, it's absolutely impossible to mistakenly load a military aircraft in the United States with nuclear weapons.
Now, this is the first time in the history of the United States Air Force that let's call it a hot or a live warhead was loaded on a missile, and 6 of them on one plane. So many mistakes, about 20 of them took place at the same time, and no one knew about it. Now, of course, as we know, Barksdale Air Force Base has been as a hub for transporting goods, equipment, and troops to Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you think this flight of B-52 bomber on August 30th, do you think it was headed towards Iran?
I do have reason to believe that aircraft was heading toward Iran, toward the Persian Gulf. I have that from 2 separate, independent, highly placed sources. I do not, at this time, believe that it was an intended mission ordered by the National Command Authority, which would be Secretary of Defense Robert Gates and or Acting President George Bush. I believe that they were out of the loop, and in fact, newspaper accounts say that they were informed immediately after the Air Force became aware that their bomber had gone flying off the reservation with, as you mentioned, 6 150-kiloton W-80-1 nuclear warheads under its wings. Now, these warheads, nuclear bombs, are usually transported by road, or they are crated and put inside transport aircraft or inside the bomb bays of bombing aircraft. But these cruise missiles were armed on the tarmac, fueled and armed under the wings of the plane. The safety pins were pulled because, again, they were not situated inside the plane in a bomb bay. They were out under the wings. No one could walk out there and activate them in flight, so they were activated on the ground. These missiles were ready to go except for one switch under the command pilot's control when that bomber took off. Very frightening if we would have had a broken arrow incident involving a crashed bomber, or if it had inadvertently dropped one or more of those cruise missiles.
Now, Will, this thing came from all the way from North Dakota to Louisiana, and the President of the United States did not even know that there is an airplane with 6 cruise missiles, nukes, ready to go off any moment, or if that plane would have crashed, we would have had the effect of now 6 of these bombs. Each one of them is about 20 times the Hiroshima bomb.
Hiroshima bomb was 13 kilotons, so you're just over 10 times, you're just over 60 times with the entire aircraft.
So we're over 60 times of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. If this thing would have crashed somewhere between North Dakota and Louisiana, we will be looking at millions of people dead.
Maybe, actually, when a nuclear weapon impacts the ground in such an accident called a broken arrow, it usually, in fact, it has always crushed and released radioactive debris into the air. This has been expedited by explosive charges that are placed around the warhead. When these go off, it spreads radioactive debris quite far, very deadly debris. But these shaped charges must be fired in a precise sequence, so it is unlikely, I have to say unlikely, the bombs would have gone nuclear, but certainly radiation would have covered a wide area. If the plane had broken up in flight or one of these missiles had exploded in flight, that plutonium could have shut down most of an entire state from now until the end of Earth's history.
Now, Will, in Louisiana, that plane sat on the runway for about 6 hours or 9 hours, I forgot how length of time, with these missiles on it. I mean, what about if somebody knew what was happening and hijacked this plane?
Very hard to get onto a base, but that...
Well, I mean, it's very hard to get on a base, but if you have the capacity, you can take over that base and take off with a nuclear armed airplane, and no one can do anything. I mean, if you send a couple of hundred people in there with guns, I'm sure they can take over that base and hijack that plane.
Well, I will certainly agree, sir, that that aircraft should have been surrounded with a heavily armed security detail. Since it was nuclear armed, it was not guarded.
In fact, there was no security details on that plane, around that plane, except what was around the base.
That's correct, and it's very strange that when those 6 warheads were activated, they released small amounts of radioactivity. That's how nuclear weapons are tracked and monitored by satellites and various monitoring stations. Alarms at Minute Air Force Base and alarms at Barksdale should have sounded when that plane taxied by. They remained silent. They could only have been shut off or stood down by a National Command Authority coded message. The situation is that the National Command Authority apparently did not know this was taking place, and my sources insist, 2 separate sources confirm, that in fact it was Chinese military hackers who engineered this entire fiasco. That is, ordered the plane loaded, had it take off, and then, most disturbingly, not only issued the go codes under the National Command Authority, but continued to issue coded instructions to the plane in flight because a mission is comprised of 3 segments, and the plane received its second orders in flight, changing its destination, ordering it out over the Gulf of Mexico this time to rendezvous with one of 3 Air Force tankers, top off its tanks, and head for the Persian Gulf. The third instruction would have given it targeting instructions for a nuclear reactor in Iran, according to my sources, hard against the mountains of Iran, not Bushehr on the coast, but inland. And those instructions were not issued. Instead, Phase 4 was initiated as apparently Air Force officers, perhaps the National Command Authority, but it looks like high-ranking officers intervened and ordered this bomber flown to the nearest base that could handle nuclear weapons, which was Barksdale. Now, Air Force officers do not have the authority to countermand a strike order, so this would have to have come from the Joint Chiefs of Staff level, or perhaps, as we are hearing in a story you sent me earlier today, perhaps there was what we might call a mutiny among higher-ranking Air Force officers. In any case, that plane was recalled to Barksdale, again, apparently without the President or Secretary of Defense's knowledge.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. Are you saying that the Chinese were able to orchestrate this?
Yes, I am. I'm saying that the Chinese have...
That they hacked into our systems and sent in all these commands and loaded a B52 bomber with 6 cruise missiles with nuclear warheads and gave him the command of where to go?
I'm saying that is exactly what happened, and my sources are saying that. On WillThomasOnline.net, I have been detailing in very detailed stories over the past year China's ability to override the microchips in U.S., for example, civilian and military equipment. That is to say, everything from cell phones to the computer on your desk to the surveillance, communications, and weapon systems of the U.S. military depend, of course, on microchips. Many, if not most of these, are made in China. For the military, these chips must be made, at least in critical weapons applications, to mil-spec, military specifications, that is specially hardened against electromagnetic pulses, specially protected. These chips were Walmarted out by Motorola, Intel, other U.S. corporations to manufacturing plants on mainland China, where they were monitored by the Chinese government. This is thoroughly documented. And the government intervened and backdoored these chips so that they could either be engineered to fail in a nuclear pulse, or they could be overridden, much as Microsoft, you recall, hooked up its software and its Windows programs to send cookies back to its head office. There was a large outcry over this. China, in much the same way, has engineered its chips to call home to Beijing. They can track American aircraft, they can issue bogus orders, and they can basically take over any military system in the United States at a time of their choosing. They have demonstrated this with satellites, American spy satellites, the space station most recently. They diverted Vice President Cheney's aircraft last February 22nd to Singapore by causing minor electrical problems on board, which they informed him on landing specifically. And my authorities are saying that China instituted these orders to demonstrate to the American military what it's capable of doing.
Okay. Well, we know they are capable of shooting a satellite from outer space, which they have done that successfully a few months ago. So China is trying to show us what China can do. Now, Wayne Madsen, he's an investigative reporter, and he used to work for the National Security Agency.
Yes.
And normally I do trust Wayne's reporting. Now, he did report today. Actually, he wrote this on the 24th of September, 3 days ago, talking about the B-52 bomber transporting 6 stealth AGM-129 advanced cruise missiles, each armed with a W-81 nuclear warhead. He did say that the ultimate destination, or the mission, was basically came to an end because some people from the inside revealed where the ultimate destination was going to be. Do you know anything about that?
No, I've read that story with great interest. We are both agreed that the aircraft was heading for Iran. We are both agreed that elements in the United States Air Force, my source says the turn-back order was issued in the United States. We're both agreed that that, in fact, happened. The question is who initiated the flight. Apparently, Mr. Madsen is saying, if I read him correctly now, please correct me here, that the order for the flight came from the National Command Authority. That would be George Bush or Robert Gates. And this was an attack meant to be a provocation, I would say an extreme provocation, a nuclear attack on a country without warning or cause.
But if we established that George Bush did not know about it until after the fact, after it was up in the air.
That is my information.
So somebody fabricated that command, and it might be what you're talking about, that the Chinese may have invented this. But now, what Wayne Madison he did an interesting reporting and findings. What he found, that we have a problem within our own military, that almost you can describe it as a coup.
Well, perhaps a mutiny, if not a coup, but certainly there's a wrestling match going on. It has been going on for months now, at least what we see in the public press, where top-ranking generals and admirals have very much opposed Mr. Bush's plan to attack Iran, and we have seen that again and again in the press. This would take it much further if, in fact, serving officers physically intervened to countermand a strike order. My only question for Mr. Madsen in his story, and I do respect his reporting, my question is, why wasn't the rest of the U.S. military stood up on a war footing? If this was a nuclear strike aimed at Iran by the United States, certainly their so-called assets in the Gulf and back home in the United States, Air Force, Navy, perhaps even ground units, would have had leaves canceled, would have gone to alert status. I've served in the U.S. military. I know this for a fact. And yet, as far as we know, no American military command went to alert during the hours that bomber was airborne. So that doesn't, to me, quite scribe with an intended strike, even a provocation on Iran.
Now, Will, would this be like the first time in the history of the United States that we had a military mutiny? Or do you know that we had similar situation? Like, did we have a similar situation back during the Vietnam War?
I will say directly, sir, that it was military refusal to carry out orders and physical sabotage of ships as big as aircraft carriers and aircraft that ended that war, combined with the street protests in the United States, the country of my birth. Absolutely, it was the military mutiny in the lower ranks that ended that war.
So you're saying that during the Vietnam War that we did have couriers that refused to perform?
I'm saying that we had sailors who dropped wrenches and spanners down into the gears, the drives of ships as big as aircraft carriers. I'm thinking of one in particular in San Diego, delaying the sailing of that ship back to the coast of Vietnam for months. This sabotage continued in Vietnam with aircraft, trucks, weapons. In fact, this sabotage continues today throughout the U.S. military, I am told. It is almost routine, and there are many people in the United States military who do not like how U.S. military personnel have been used and disposed of in Iraq, and they certainly do not want to see America embroiled in a war in Iran that they say, and their top generals and admirals agree, we will lose.
Okay. Senator Joseph Lieberman and Senator Kyle of Arizona, they were able, actually, an act or a bill passed yesterday describing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, which means this is the first step, and this is the Congress authorizing the president to take action since we are in the middle of a war on terrorism, and if we identified that group as a terrorist organization, then we are basically authorizing the United States president to take action against that country. And incidentally, it was passed by 76 to 22, I believe, 76-4 and 22. Do we see the same people here? Because if you remember, before the war on Iraq, if you remember, Joseph Lieberman was very much the one who's carrying the torch, and the Israel lobby was right there with him. He was representing that lobby, very much is orchestrating the war on Iran now. Do you see it that way?
I absolutely see it that way. It's Iraq deja vu all over again, and amazingly, it looks like the American public is going to go along with it again. I never thought they would after the exposés of the deceptions perpetrated on the American public and military over Iraq. But yes, exactly. Iran is being scapegoated. Once again, none of these charges have been proven. There's plenty of allegations flying around that Iran is assisting its Shiite brothers in Iraq to resist the American occupiers. Well, that's self-defense. If that's true, I think if America does not want Iran to assist Iraq militarily, we don't have proof of this, but for argument's sake, then America should withdraw our troops.
Well, I mean, we created that situation there in Iraq, and Iran is reacting to what we created.
That's right, and they have a right to assist their Shiite brethren in Iraq, but to launch nuclear strikes at them for supplying explosive conventional weapons seems more than a bit drastic.
Okay. Will, stay with me. We're going to go to the phones with Tom on line one. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, yeah. Hey, good evening, Dr. Tillawi. A couple of things. I wanted to comment on your earlier comments about Ahmadinejad. Excuse my mispronunciation if it's not correct. But
you pronounce it right, just like I did.
When I was going to Tulane back in the 70s, we would have these different people that would come in and speak and all, and I was really shocked that the president of Colombia would berate him and treat him that way. He was invited, he was a guest. That disturbed me. I didn't like that, but I guess what I kind of thought was that he invited him and then he caught some heat behind the scenes. People maybe that are large donors to the university said, look, we're gonna cut back on our donations if this goes through, blah, blah, blah. Well, that troubled me. And then I was watching C-SPAN yesterday, and I can't remember the California congressman's name, but he was insisting that we didn't help Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons. But something that I like to remind myself of and think about is that Iran and Iraq were at war for 8 years, and we were helping Saddam Hussein at one point when we thought that Iran might be successful in the war with Iraq, and then we also helped Iran when we were doing the Iran-Contra thing. We were selling them weapons and taking that money and helping the Contras in Nicaragua. So all these entangling alliances, and there's just two more quick points that when Bush the other day said that the American people were upset about Burma, it blew my mind because, I mean, I wasn't even thinking about Burma, and I said, the American people, well, I'm an American. Burma, yeah, that's important, but that was the last thing on my mind 2 days ago, Burma. So I'm thinking, anyway, the whole thing, this whole Bush thing has been a disaster. And like the Dixie Chicks said, and I'll still go along with the lead singer, he's an embarrassment, and I can't wait until he's out of office, and hopefully we'll be able to control this neocon baloney. And the last comment I want to say or make is I'm concerned about this dual citizenship between the United States and Israel. If anybody that's Jewish can be a dual citizen, then where does their allegiance lie ultimately? And so if what they want to do in the world diverges from what we want to do, if you live here, and you have dual citizenship, what do? You have to choose between one or the other, and that troubles me because I only have citizenship here. But those are my comments, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Any comments, Will?
I couldn't hear very well. Would you? Anything you want to recap for me quickly?
Okay. Well, very much he was talking about what Ahmadinejad and his speech, and what Lee Bollinger and his speech, but we're not going to go through that. But one of the things that the last comment that he made is that we have people with their allegiance to Israel right here in the United States, and they are in sensitive positions. And so where do we go with this? I mean, if we don't like George Bush, we have Giuliani coming who wants Israel to be included in with NATO, which means now if Israel gets included with NATO, then we are very much, if Israel, Israel's enemy becomes our enemies.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing new there. JINSA and the Israeli lobby has always been strong in the U.S., and we see in this current administration, I have a list of people in my book, Days of Deception, serving in the present administration who have very close ties, in fact, with Israel. So if it comes to your enemy is my enemy, then I would say that the U.S. is doing Israel's bidding.
Well, I mean, definitely, if we go back for, the last two administrations, George Bush 1 and George Bush 2, we see clearly that they have played a role. Now, the Israel lobby have always played a role in United States politics, but they were directly involved in playing this role in the Bush administration, the first one and the second one. And now we are seeing them even in the next administration, which it looks like they are setting up Giuliani to be the next president of the United States. Then we are seeing them even out there in the open, in your face, sort of policy saying we're here and we're not going anywhere.
I agree with you. And I respect Israel's right to defend itself. I respect the Palestinians' right to defend themselves. And if everyone is defending themselves, we're all going to end up dead. My question to the good people of Israel is, and to the United States for that matter, what is the threat posed by Iran with a single nuclear weapon? To launch that weapon, as we all know, would be suicidal. The country would be reduced to radioactive glass within 40 minutes. What is the problem here? We have Israel armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, the United States, which has actually used them against two cities, and apparently that's all well and good. But a country decides to defend itself, perhaps, and again, we just had an IEC report saying that we see no indication of a nuclear weapons program in Iran. They would be, frankly, silly not to develop a nuclear deterrent.
Well, you're right, and on this show, this was our position that we maintained, even if they want to have the bomb, estimations of 5 to 10 years, and let's say they have it tomorrow. Israel has 200 bombs, according to Mordechai Vanunu, when he left. And also Joseph Serciano, he had put the estimate at about 150. And we have the United States with probably 10,000 nuclear missiles. And as Ahmadinejad, president of Iran, said a few days ago that the United States is testing the 5th and 6th generation nuclear weapons, and they don't even have a nuclear weapon program in Iran, but assuming they have. So what this boils down to, Will, is this thing about Iran and nuclear bomb or nuclear weapon is the same thing as Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction. It's the same story again and again. They are recycling the same story, and I might add that they probably will be successful.
Yes, they are recycling it, and they seem to be getting away with it, and I'm baffled and concerned. And Yeah, Mr. Ahmadinejad's recent visit to Ground Zero, or his desired visit to Ground Zero, and the uproar that caused in the United States, also, I must say, really upset me, because we'll recall that on September 11th, 2001, it was Iran state television, for the first time in living memory in that country, came out all day with coverage of the event, condemning the terrorist attacks. You had thousands of people on the streets of Iran and Tehran denouncing the terrorist attacks, expressing solidarity and sympathy for the people of the United States. And yet when he wants to go to Ground Zero, he's called, well, I won't repeat some of the names, a terrorist for one. And yet this is a country that extended sympathy to the United States, a very modern, progressive country by Middle Eastern standards. And I've been working very hard, as many of us have, to see this country have the room, the space, and the respect to choose its own destiny and find a democracy in its own way.
Will, do you see any role for Dick Cheney? Because, apparently he's been playing this from the start, and he's been the godfather of this whole movement. Do you see any role for him to play in the next election or the next administration?
Interesting question. I've just published an expose at willthomasonline.net revealing Dick Cheney's secretive plans to run and win the presidency in 2008. It seems mind-boggling, with most Americans wanting to see this man impeached and opinion polls lower than Mr. Bush's, and yet he does have a strategy. He has been lobbying Congress, labor unions, lining them up, and most importantly, he has been to the United States press, the mainstream print and broadcast media, and isn't it curious that not one of those news organizations have asked, "Oh, Mr. Vice President, are you running?" They haven't asked the question. They've been told not to ask the question.
Well, it is, as you said, it's mind-boggling to even think about it, and probably people watching us tonight, they're going to think, oh, these two are nuts to even talk about this stuff. Where did you get that information from?
I got that from a source who received it from people on Capitol Hill who took part in this lobbying effort among Congress people, lining people up. Here's the deal, though. A year is a long time. In fact, a week is a long time. His strategy, Mr. Cheney's strategy, is to wait until very late in the election cycle when the other candidates have made their mistakes, spent their money,
that.
And then declare very, very late, perhaps coupled with a terrorist event, some kind of situation that requires drastic, firm, even ruthless leadership. At that point, he will come in and say, I'm your strong man, I can hold it together. We sure don't see any Democratic opposition at this point to someone as strong as Mr. Cheney. So while I agree, it seems bizarre now. Frankly, just about everything going on does.
I remember when George W. Bush, when he called on Dick Cheney in the first administration to help him find a running mate. And Dick Cheney was basically over a committee to find and help and advise George Bush on who his running mate will be, and then he told him, "It's me."
That's right. That's right. The line in my story is, "Why not Dick?" Whenever there's a vacancy in the administration for years past, people have said, "Well, why not Dick?" And so apparently Dick said, "Why not Dick?" And he's thinking about it next year. I would watch this very carefully.
Now, another thing that I find mysterious, probably, but it's probably everything is calculated. We have Hillary Clinton running, who is a woman, and then we have the second, which would probably be on her ticket, is Barack Obama. And if they start something big, it's going to come time where the people in the United States will be questioning if a woman can run a major war as of such that they're planning on. And then, of course, comes the Muslim background of Barack Obama. So both of these Democratic candidates they're sitting ducks for failure. in case if we have a disaster later on in the country or even abroad, that people will start saying, oh, she's not going to be able to run the war, and then her running mate is a Muslim, so we're not going to vote for a Muslim, which basically, and I'm thinking that it's not, I wasn't aware until a couple of days ago about the article that you wrote with Dick Cheney, but I was thinking they are setting up Rudy Giuliani actually to be the next president of the United States.
Oh boy, I hope not. Part of the strategy for Mr. Cheney is to, quote, reach across the aisle and pick someone perhaps like Hillary Clinton as his running mate, turn the tables, and reach across the aisle. I don't know how successful that would be, but that is the intended strategy to offer the Democrats at least a place at the table, a high place at the table. I agree with your assessment of Mr. Obama and Mrs. Clinton both, although they both talked very tough on, quote, winning the war in Iraq, which makes me very nervous and, to my mind, disqualifies them both as candidates for the presidency of the United States.
Because, you know, another thing that I'm thinking about, the presidential directive that George Bush just signed, I think it was, I don't know, August 9th or July 9th, something like that, where in case of a national disaster or a catastrophic event, it could be economic, it could be environmental, it could be terrorism, it could be whatever, that he basically will be able to take over all three branches of government or powers, and he can just continue and say it's not going to be an election, and his party and Dick Cheney could say that, hey, look, you know, we don't have time for elections now. We have a country to save.
Again, that's accurate. That is correct. That executive order was signed. By the way, that event could take place outside of the United States.
Exactly. It said anywhere in that directive.
That's right. If he deems it a national emergency, then it is a national emergency, and the elections are off.
Very good. We only have a couple of minutes left, Will. Any final remarks?
I think we have some breathing room. If this story is accurate, I believe it to be accurate, if it proves out that China does have control of many of the microchips in the U.S. military, if it can order bombers into the air with nuclear missiles, if it can countermand orders and issue its own, that actually gives us a breathing space, because high-level commanders in the U.S. military cannot now be certain where their orders are originating from. That's the good news, and I don't think that China is in any position to, quote, call the shots for very much longer. They might be the world's leading power in a few years, but that will be very, very short-lived as they run out of water and oil simultaneously. I think we're all going to have to pull together, and we need regime change, peaceful regime change in the United States urgently, and we need people of this planet to come together and face the problems, the real threats to our security, which are environmental.
Well, very quick, in 30 seconds, tell me why Israel is requesting the aid we give them in euros, not in dollars.
The same reason oil companies from Venezuela to Kuwait are switching from the dollar to the euro. The Canadian dollar is now higher than the U.S. dollar, and that's a short answer. It doesn't make any sense to trade in a sinking dollar.
Very good. Well, Thomas, thank you very much for coming on the show. It has been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good day.
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
as we say, we bring them to you and you decide. We bring you the stuff that normally the mainstream media does not cover. We cover it here, and we tell you when we're not sure about something, and we tell you when we are sure about it. One thing we are sure about, that Iran is not a threat. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program, and if they do and get one bomb, it's going to be a suicide to use it. Just remember that. Remember the weapons of mass destruction. Good night. We will see you next Thursday. Good night.
Hi, I'm Keisha Alama, Community Relations Coordinator for Faith House. Faith House is a